Hello, everybody. Okay, I think we're going. Yay! Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another Deep Astronomy live stream. My name is Tony Darnell, and I am not unhappy to be here. And I hope all of you are not unwell. Today, we're going to be talking about things that are not unlike getting a job in astronomy. Sorry, I can't help it. I've been reading too much George Orwell lately, and every time I think about him, I think about that remark about the not un thing. So it is a rather silly thing that we do, but there is a difference between the statement "I am convinced by your argument" and "I am not unconvinced by your argument." So there are times when it's grammatically correct to say that, but most of the time we use it wrong. Anyway, I'm not unhappy to be here. I hope you're not unwell. And we are going to talk, as I said, about getting a job in astronomy. And this stream is inspired by, well, I don't know. I mean, I just want to give a shout out to Julian, my friend in Toronto. He's the one that prompted what I'm going to talk about at the top of this stream, which is what it's like to work in an observatory and what astronomers do in an observatory. And then I'm going to follow that up with things that I've been getting back feedback from many people over the years. Believe it or not, I'm about to turn 60. I'm 59 years old. And I've been doing this deep astronomy thing since 2006. So I've been doing this a really long time. Not all at once, and I've taken breaks because I've had to work in my job, in my career. And I spent 25, 30 years working in professional astronomy. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my career here in just a minute. But over the course of my doing this YouTube stuff, whether it was just uploading a 240p video back in 2006, remember, this was before Google bought it, and you could only upload very low quality things, and it had to be less than 10 minutes long too, so it couldn't be very long either. But over the years, one of the things people have since started watching my videos when they were kids, in many cases, and come back and tell me that they went into a career in astronomy because of what they learned on my channel. Now, there's nothing. I don't care what happens to me on YouTube after this. That is all the reason I need to continue to keep doing this, because it makes it all worthwhile, even putting up with all the YouTube commenters and stuff. So this is partly inspired by that, because the feedback I get is they liked all the space videos and all the other stuff I've ever done, but the thing they liked the most was, and the thing they didn't get anywhere else, was my advice on getting a job in the field. They really found that valuable. So I'm going to refresh that a little bit. I've done videos in the past on this, but now I'm going to kind of refresh that a little bit. Sorry, I'm looking at the chat and I get distracted. So just so you know, for you, if you're here for the first time, I am streaming on Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, and I've got all of the chats are aggregated here, and I can do things like this, which makes it nice. I can, quote people who are saying things. And talk about them that way. So if you got questions or comments, please let me know in the chat. And a little bit later on, I'll join the voice channel in Discord if I have time. And nobody ever joins, so I don't do it that often anymore. And maybe we will talk. We could talk that way over audio if you do join. All right. So let me start with a little bit of news. Most of you have already pointed out that yesterday, JWST, the James Webb Space Telescope, the Webb Space Telescope, had an incident. And it is been delayed. Its launch has been delayed for, I don't have my thing up real quick. Hold on. Let me get that going. There we go. An incident has occurred with the James Webb Space Telescope, and it has been delayed 4 days. So December 22nd is when they're saying now that it's going to launch. Apparently, a collar that they were putting onto an adapter went in, did a sudden unplanned release. It's a clamp ban. That's what it's called. A sudden unplanned release of a clamp band which secures web to the vehicle launch adapter caused a vibration throughout the observatory. And out of an overabundance of caution, or you know, they decided that they're gonna check this out. Why did the band do that? Why did the clamp come undone? And was there any damage? Because unfortunately, the vibration sensors that they have installed on there to detect this exact thing, were not put in because are not on at the time because they were getting it ready to put into the rocket. So I don't know. I know that we're all a little bit, on edge about this thing, but and we've heard it before. It's going to launch this day. It's going to launch that day. But for some reason, and I don't know why, I'm actually confident they're going to do this in December. So I think that this 22nd date they will make, unless they drop it, which would which would suck. Let's hope that doesn't happen. If they drop it, then oh my god. Anyway, so that was some news. But on the good news side of it, Hubble seems to be back up and running again. They've been having some iffy troubles with it, so now it seems to be back up and running, I think. And so it's back taking data. So, good news, bad news. All right. So I don't have, because I'm going to be basically telling you the story of my life and then giving you advice on how to do your job search. I didn't really make a lot of slides this time um, because it's just going to be a bunch of bullet points. So instead, I made these little captions down here at the bottom to remind me where to go and what to talk about. So um, Julian, Julian wanted to know, what's it like to observe in an observatory? In other words, what do astronomers do? What do they really do in those observatories? Gone are the days where you look through an eyepiece, or you clamped on your camera and you pushed the little shutter release and then waited, and then took out your photographic plates. That's gone from the observing playbook now. uh, Instead, it's all become very automated now. Time on telescopes around the world is very competitive, whether it be a ground-based observatory or a space telescope. So, what astronomers do to get time at all is they have to apply for time on the telescope at the observatory itself. And there's a staff of astronomers on hand to go over the proposals, and you have to have good science, and you have to, and they have to find, you have to tell them what you're going to do and how much data you need, how much observing time you need, what wavelengths you need to observe in, all of these things. And then they look at your proposal and they see, based on the scientific merit, whether they're going to give you time. And you have to pay for that time, unless there's some kind of grant process associated with it. Most observatories have grants, but some don't. And your institution or your own research grant has to pay for that time. And how much it costs, just I don't have any idea what it actually costs, because I've never had to pay, but it is, as you can imagine, not cheap. So you're given so many hours in a ground-based observatory to observe, or in the case of Hubble or a space-based telescope, you're given observing time in units of, in Hubble's case, orbits. One orbit is basically 90 minutes, but you don't get that full observing time, I don't think. But maybe you do, because it doesn't, except for the times when it's near the sun, if it ever is, it can't point anywhere near that. So you have to kind of plan your observing schedule around that. But once time is given to an astronomer or a group of astronomers to do an observatory run, they are allocated time, and they typically go to the observatory. Now, this is the weird part. I let me show you some pictures that I took. Let me see. This is when I was at CTIO. Actually, um, yeah. So this is when I was at CTIO back in 2009. And let me go ahead and make this big. And this was Santiago, Chile. This is where we were staying in before we went up in the mountain. But this is the Cerro Tololo Mountain. That's the Blanco Dome right there, and that's the mountains, the Andes Mountains that we were in. That's me. That's Shantanu. That's me again. But in the background, you can see CTIO right back here, or I'm sorry, the Blanco telescope right there. And the observing room and all of that stuff is located inside the telescope. That's Cerro Tololo, or I'm sorry, Cerro. That's where the Gemini South telescope is, and I forget the peak it's on right now. Cerro Pachon, maybe I can't remember. Anyway, that's also where they're building the Rubin Observatory. That's the astronomer's quarters. That's where you sleep when you go there. All of these, you'll notice that these are all windows that have shutters on them. There's also shutters on the other side. There's a cafeteria right in the center here, but you're awake all night and you sleep all day, and those quarters are very good at keeping out the light. Boy, does your schedule get messed up when you're out there. Uh, you wake up about 3 in the afternoon, get ready for your observing run, you eat breakfast, and then get ready to start. Or I guess we had dinner, I guess, and then we'd go and observe all night. And then when the sun came up, went and had some breakfast, and then went to bed. Um, some sunrise stuff. So this is the close up of the dome itself, and what I want to point out here is something that I talked about in the last Space Junk podcast episode. Um, Modern observatories don't look like this anymore. This is kind of a relic in the sense that it's got a metal dome. It's got a hemispheric dome mounted around a metal, very thin metal silo kind of arrangement. But these up here, these doors open along the side of the dome to let air through so that it can equalize temperature and minimize dome seeing. Airflow is very important in an observatory, and so these shutters open and close. Okay, to kind of um, equalize the pressure and the dome seeing, minimize the dome seeing. And of course, here's just a few other photos of the surrounding area. Telescope you can look through. This is the nearby smaller telescopes that are there. Again, they have the traditional design. This was built quite a while ago. Um, Here's the whole complex here that you can see down. This is from on top of near the dome itself. There's the cruise quarters, and I forget what that is. That might be the dining facility there. And this is how they get things up and down into the telescope. That's the 4-meter primary. It's not very good. This is I had a this was actually an old digital camera I had in 2009, so it's not taking the best pictures. But there's the primary mirror. That's 4 meters in diameter. There's a better picture of it there. There's the secondary right up there that houses. Right now, what's up there is decam. This is before decam was installed when I was down there. So that's what decam is. And of course, you see the yoke mount. Sorry about that, but anyway. So those were some pictures. In fact, because it's cold enough today, I'm even wearing my NOAO jacket because I got it when I was out there. So this was taken, like I said, back in 2009. That's when I was out there. I showed you those pictures because they're the only ones I have on digital format. I've worked in many other observatories in the past, but they were they were actually on film. I have all the other observatory the other observatories I worked at. The pictures I took were all on film, and I haven't digitized them yet. But I've worked at the Summers Bosch Observatory, the High Altitude Observatories, Mauna Loa Solar Observatory, course, CTIO, which I just showed you, and then University of Illinois. That's where I did work with DCAM, and then I finished up at the Space Telescope Science Institute. So those are the places where I've worked professionally, and that relate to astronomy jobs. So so there's several types of observing, to answer Julian's question. When you go, so astronomers get time, they go to the observatory, and they get to stay in those dormitories that are there. And I think Paranal also has these observatories. I'm sorry, they have residential areas as well. In fact, I think they were used in a James Bond movie. Actually, you stay in those residential residences while you're there working, because they are very remote. You're not going to go back down the mountain after you're done observing every time. You need to stay up there for the entire time you're there. That could be as short as a few days to as much as a month. You could get that much time observing, especially if you get time on some of the smaller telescopes, and not necessarily the 4-meter in this case with Blanco, where it's the most in demand. So you can stay up there for quite a while. And then to do your observing run, though, it's all automated. There are observers already there, people who are hired. This is a job that people can get that is not a PhD level job, that you can operate the telescopes for the astronomers. They know your observing program. They know what you're going to observe. You've already put your proposal in, because you have to be very specific about what you're going to observe and with what instruments they have, because there could be spectrographs, there could be filter wheels, things like that you want to use, and you need to tell them not only which instruments you want, but how long your exposures are going to be. You have to figure all that out. They enter that into the observing program, and then you go each night and they take the data. They're operating the telescope. You're sitting with them, generally waiting for the data to come off the telescope. You're just waiting right there. This was back in 2009. Nowadays, I'm not so sure that you need to wait around at the facility anymore, especially if they've got good internet connection. So the observer is taking your data. You can grab it right away, and immediately what most astronomers do is start processing it. They start, they've got the darks, they've got the flats, they've got all the calibration images, and then they start calibrating their data, and then they start looking to see if there's anything, right away. They usually have some kind of specialized processing software that they use to look for things like flux changes or luminosity, brightness changes, whatever they're studying. They've written code to go through and their images and do that analysis with. So they're probably doing it right there as the data are coming off. Now, sometimes you can't. You have to wait much, much longer. But in general, a typical night, depending on the size of the detector, for example, DCAM is 500 megapixels. So that's a half a gigapixel camera. And it puts out, as you can imagine, especially if it's got, if it's a 16-bit or a 24-bit, detector, you're looking at 500 megapixels times 12 or 16 or 24, whatever the bit depth is. So that's quite a large image. And then you've taken hundreds of these every single night. So you get this data, put it all together, and start processing it right away, or you're just waiting, depending if you need it all in a big chunks, then you wait for those big chunks to come in. But all of this involves sitting in a room. It's warm, it's heated, there's food, there's coffee, and you are not anywhere near the telescope dome itself. That's how things are done almost 100% of the time now, in almost every observatory. So there's an observer who works, that's their job. They go up there to that observatory every single day, and they operate it for visiting astronomers who come and get telescope time. And that's how it works. And in the case of Mauna Loa, the solar observatory, that was a synoptic or a survey observatory. You didn't apply for time to go up there and observe. It did observations, the same observations every single day. There wasn't any clouds. And they took pictures of the sun in H alpha. They took it in helium 1, and they took images of the low corona called the K corona, which is a polarized light from the solar corona very close to the limb of the sun. And they did that every day. And you didn't need to apply for data or apply for time to observe it. If you wanted to use that data, you just went to the website and got it. But they had two observers. They were Native Hawaiians, and they worked on the other mountain, not Mauna Kea, but Mauna Loa, which is an active volcano. And they just did the same thing every single day, and the data were then transmitted to Boulder, where it was housed and served from servers in Colorado. Space Telescope Science Institute, as you can imagine, that is also run via remote control. Nobody's going up to Hubble to look. So that data is all beamed down via TDRS, the what is it called? Something tracking data relay satellite system. It's basically the NASA internet, and it's what the ISS uses, and all the space telescopes and space probes that we use to get data back here. You again, very competitive to get time on Hubble. You apply to a time allocation committee what you're going to use Hubble for, why you want to use it, justify yourself scientifically, and then they will come back and either say yes or no. And that program, actually, because it's run by NASA, you can get grants, and if your science is good enough, you don't have to pay for it. So that's kind of cool. But all data that comes out of that observatory from Hubble is generally embargoed for a full year. So, Julian, I hope that helps you understand a little bit more about what goes on in an observatory and how astronomers observe. This day and age, you don't actually have to go. But because and especially with bandwidth throughput increasing as much as it has, you can just get your data put on a server remotely. But people still go. They still drive up Mauna Kea. They still drive up CTIO or Cerro Tololo, and they still go and they get their data that way. But they don't run the telescope. They just sit there and get their data and then leave with it and do their science. Okay, that's a professional synopsis of how those things work. Okay, so let me just go. I'm going to go to the chat and see if there's any comments that are relevant to that. You guys are still talking about JWST. Hey, Tony, if the telescope can't survive a jolt, God help it on the launch and the vibration from that. They've tested for those. They've done acoustic and vibration tests at Goddard on this, and again at Redondo Beach. They've done this testing, but it's based on what a rocket launch is going to be like, not what happens when a banded collar clamp snaps off, right? So they want to make sure that didn't do anything they hadn't intended. Chances are it's probably fine, but they want to know what caused that clamp to come undone, and did the vibration do anything funky? I mean, it's just common sense. You want to make sure of that. And Thomas is commenting, fun fact, I was there when you went live for the first time on Google. I think there was 4 or 5 persons there. Yes. I don't know if it was this one or not, but this was when Google Hangouts first started. And it was me, Alberto Conti, and it might have been Sarah Seeger. I think 4,000 people watched that stream. That was one of the highest live streams I had ever done. Of course, Sarah Seeger's a rock star, so she was there, and that was really cool. That's pretty cool. Dan is commenting, Tony, you personally rekindled my desire to purchase a scope and get outside and look up. I love it, but I have to have an afternoon nap in order to stay awake well into the night. I hear you, Dan. I hear you, man. Yep, naps become very important at my age too. WJ Rasmussen, speaking of dropping JWST, wasn't there an expensive piece of space hardware that got damaged because it wasn't secured before a technician tried to move it? I think you're referring to the test in the Northrop clean room where they were deploying the heat shield, the heat sun shield, and they some bolts came off, and some of the mylar got torn, and that was a big deal, caused another couple years of delays and many more millions and millions of dollars. So there. Mike 8 Keys commenting, LSST was a better name. I know. I still call it that. I still call it that. Okay. Let's see. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get into. I'm gonna come back to some of these comments, but I don't want to read too much of it because I get distracted and I don't get to comment on what I'm talking about. So let me just focus again. Now, jobs in astronomy. Most people think that to get a job in astronomy, you have to become an astronomer with a capital A. An astronomer with a capital A is someone who has a PhD. They have gone through bachelor's, probably gotten a degree in physics. They went into graduate school, probably got a degree in physics, a graduate degree in physics and or astrophysics, with physics with an emphasis on astronomy, and then they got into a PhD candidate program. In the physics world, if you get your physics bachelor's degree, that's what I did. That's the big decision point. Do you then want to go from into the advanced degree area? When I reached that point, when I got my bachelor's degree, I was older than most of my peers. I was in my early 30s, and I had two small children. And I had just gone through a big physics program at the University of Colorado, and I was sick of doing problem sets. I was sick of studying all the time. I was sick of being tested all the time. Every single Christmas, I had to worry about finals. So I just got to where I just didn't think I had it in me to do a physics degree. So I decided not to do it. However, someone else, a friend of mine who was had also just gotten a degree at the University of Colorado, she decided she did want to become an astronomer with a capital A, and she went through mentorship with a friend of ours named Tom Holzer. He was a former director of NCAR at the time. She went into a postgraduate program at University of Oslo in Norway and got a PhD in physics. She is now running the heliospherics division in NASA at Goddard. So she went far, much farther than I did professionally. But there's a difference between the kind of job she had and the kind of job I had. On the other hand, for me, I stopped at a bachelor's degree and started applying for software engineering positions. And I became a software engineer who wrote code that controlled cameras and controlled processed data and ran other equipment and telescope control. So I have a specialty in when I write code. I know how to write code that will control a telescope, that will control a camera, that will control filters, and also process a variety of FITS images in different ways. And I learned how to program this. The programming languages I used were primarily ANSI C, just regular old C, not C++, Perl, because at the time that was the big scripting language. Now it's Python, and LabVIEW, which is a graphic uh, programming language. It's bizarre to work in, but it's awesome. That's put out by National Instruments, and also a software. A language called IDL. So that's a scripting language, and it's very powerful, also very expensive. Learned MATLAB a little bit, but I hated it, so I just didn't want to learn it. And I never learned Java. I actively, violently tried to stay away from Java. I hated it. I don't like object-oriented programming, period. So anyway, that was the approach I took, and I ended up, especially early in my career, making more money than the people who went to advanced schools get their degree, because they had to become basically a slave while they were a graduate student, and then they became postdocs. That's the job you get after you get your PhD, and these are also low paying, but they are very high pressure. Once you become a postdoc, you get your PhD, you worked very hard, now you're a postdoc, and we're going to see some of these jobs here in just a minute. And if you work for longer than 2 years in a postdoc position, that's a problem from your career. You got to get out of that, and you got to get into a tenure track position as soon as you can. There's a lot of pressure on going that route, and hats off to Holly because she not only navigated that well, but she became um, quite high in her field, and I've got nothing but mad respect for that. I couldn't have done it. She was a lot smarter than me, but it wasn't just that. It was the lifestyle changes I was going to have to commit to be able to make that happen. And with a small family, I just couldn't do it. I just didn't want to do it. I could have, but I didn't want to. So I was actually making more money than all the postdocs that were working with us at the time when I was early in my career, and and I did that for a good 5 or 10 years into my career, and then those people who were parallel with me but went to get a PhD, they started making more money than me because they got tenure track positions. They became, well known in their field. They were heads of various committees and boards, and became project managers of things, of space missions and rovers, things like that. A lot of stress, a lot of responsibility. Could you imagine being Greg Robinson right now? He's the program manager for JWST. You could I don't He's probably going, you can't pay me enough right now for the stress. He's doing it obviously for reasons that are his own, but could you imagine the stress of being the program manager for JWST? And that's more stressful than even being the project scientist. John Mather is the project scientist, and he's got a Nobel Prize. He's done all right for himself. Um, but again, this is like a lot of strain and pressure to get that far, and that doesn't even talk about the publishing that you have to do. So, so most jobs in astronomy require a degree, but not all of them. I got a bachelor's degree in physics. You're going to want to get, almost certainly, a bachelor's degree in some physical science, preferably physics. If you could also get one in astronomy, an undergrad degree in astronomy, but it's not as rigorous as a physics degree. I was lucky when I was at the University of Colorado. There were 3 plans you could sign up for physics. And one of them was for plasma physics. It had different emphasis, right? One was for, I think, plasma physics. One was for astrophysics, and another one was, I forget the third one. But there were emphases on the coursework that you had to take. So I had a physics degree with an astrophysics emphasis, which means I had to take a lot of classes in astronomy while I was during my 4 years there. I didn't have to take a lot of classes in like solid state physics, things like that. I didn't have to take those. I just took the astronomy ones. And then I came out with a BA in physics. But while I was there, they introduced an undergraduate degree in astronomy. And I looked at the degree, and it was way simpler. You didn't have to take some really hard courses to get a degree in astronomy. That's why I think when people start talking about, and that's true with astrophysics as well. If you got an astrophysics PhD, it's hard, but it's not as rigorous, I don't think anyway, as a physics PhD. You've got to go through a lot more hard science to get through that program than you do with astrophysics. It's just easier. The physics and the math and the stuff you got to do is just easier to figure out than spending a lot of time in quantum mechanics or really complicated classical mechanics. So I stayed with physics. I did not get the undergrad astronomy degree. It won't hurt your career if you got an astronomy undergraduate. No one's going to look badly on that, but I'm just saying it's an option. And you also need to consider, if you're going to go into the advanced stages of an education like graduate school in astronomy, in physics, the decision point, like I was starting to say earlier, is at the graduation of your bachelor's degree. Then you choose, I'm going to just stop here or I'm going to go further. Because if you go to a master's and then stop, that's kind of a sign of failure, right? Because a master's in physics doesn't mean anything, really. I mean, it means something. You went through some coursework and you took some comprehensive exams, but you didn't do a thesis. And if you stop there, you're not really done. It's basically a formality to get that master's degree, because the expectation is you're going to go on to the PhD. And so it's kind of, I'm not saying it's looked down on, but it's like a sign of, oh, you couldn't do the thesis. Oh, okay then. It's kind of like that. So if you're going to do it, go all the way and do it because you just want the PhD. Because if you do it for any other reason, like, oh, I'm going to be a big famous astronomer, that's not good enough because you're going to get burnt out. You got to want it for different reasons than just to get a good job. I can't tell you how many people I saw as postdocs quit, just leave, men and women, but mostly women, leaving the field and there's a lot of misogyny going on in at least it used to be in the field, and so they wouldn't make it. Not as many made it long term as did the guys, but the guys were dropping out like crazy too. They were saying that the competition is just so hard, and the you have to publish papers. You have to. That's your currency. That's the thing that measures you as a scientist, as an astronomer. So you need those papers to get published, or you're not taken seriously, and you won't get the jobs you want, or you won't get tenure at a university. And that's another thing. Tenure is incredibly hard to get. 5% of the people who try to go into academia succeed. 5%. That means there's a 95% failure rate getting a tenure track position. Now, the places you can go to get a tenure track position are not just universities. The National Center for Atmospheric Research, for example, private or government institutions, all of them have scientist track positions. They're called that. They're called tenure track positions. Universities aren't the only ones that do it. Institutes do it. I'm sure this is true in Europe as well as the United States. National Center for Atmospheric Research is one. National Center for Supercomputing Applications, that's another one. I'm just trying to think of national labs right now. The National Institute for Standards and Technology. All of these people, they're not academic, they're research oriented. They also have those tenure track positions. And so you don't have to really just be in academia, but it's still competitive. It's very hard. It's a lot of stress. So think about that before you have good reasons for getting that PhD is all I'm saying. But you don't need it to get a job. In fact, you don't. I've actually seen lately people getting jobs without a college degree at all. I don't know if it's because of the job market or what, or maybe the examples I've seen were for some very talented people. Um, in my case, I got a job before I graduated at the High Altitude Observatory, but it was with the understanding that I was going to get my degree. I had to finish my degree, or they weren't going to let me stay. Another guy at the institute, he's a really talented kid, really knew a lot, very good programmer, self-taught, everything else, did really good job. They hired him as a research assistant. What do they call them? RIAs, research instrument assist. I forget what the I stood for. Anyway, he was basically a programmer position, for the Hubble team, and he got that job without a degree. But he was very talented. He also worked there as an IT person first. He was a sysadmin first, and then worked in as a job. So it's possible, but I wouldn't count on it happening all the time. Get that you're going to pretty much need a bachelor's degree in most cases, and I'll show you some examples where that's not the case. So here are some types of jobs. There's tenure track, I just told you about, that requires a PhD. There's also postdocs. Overwhelmingly, those are the largest number of jobs that are available right now. There's engineering jobs. That's what I went into. And then there's technical staff, and then there's grad student. So those are the different kinds of jobs that you can get. And they're all based on your particular interest. Now, you can have a PhD and still get an engineering job, but you're kind of overeducated if you do that. So, all right, let's talk about where to get your job, where to look. Write this down. You need to know about the AAS Job Register. Here are all the jobs that are available. This is the first place I always looked to get a job. Let me make this embiggened so you can see this better. Where's my cursor? There it is. And let me get rid of that. Okay. It is jobregister.aas.org, and this is outlining everything I just told you. It's broken up all the jobs as different by the type. The top one is faculty positions, both visiting and non-tenure. You could get a temporary job at a university, but you know, but there's most people. Oh, oh, I guess I'm sorry, visiting and non-tenure. These are non-tenure track. And so an example of that is somebody's looking for a scientist in the test guest investigator program office. Okay. So it's at the University of Maryland, and you're working on tests, and this is for a scientist to work in the test guest investigator program office, and it's within the exoplanets and stellar astrophysics laboratory at NASA Goddard. So you'd be working at Goddard. It's funded through the University of Maryland, though, and the guest investigator program. It sounds like it's temporary, and you can this gives you names to contact and things like this. So that's one type of job you can get. Another one is tenure track. This is if you're already got the PhD and you're wanting to get on the tenure track. These are the highly competitive ones I was telling you about. These are things like professor, assistant professor. They outline which ones are new with that yellow Web 1.0 graphic there. And there's all kinds of things in here. There's tenure track assistant professor in experimental physics, big data astrophysics, things like that. So these positions are all for people with PhDs, associate professor, and there's a lot of them. But here is where there's most postdoc positions and fellowships. These are temporary jobs that you are given after getting a PhD, and they are designed to get your career kick-started. Okay, and there are hundreds of these. Here's one. If you wanted to work on JWST, go to work at Johns Hopkins. There's a JWST postdoc to work on JWST observations of high redshift galaxies magnified by gravitational lensing. This sounds really cool. You'd be working with Dan Coe. I've met him. Larry Bradley, met him too, and then a bunch of other people. I've met. Noor is pretty cool. He actually hired me. He was one of the committees that interviewed me when I went to work there. So this is for Johns Hopkins. This is a postdoc. You could work on JWST. And there are, I'm just going to keep scrolling. This is how many there are. Dozens and dozens and dozens of postdocs. Okay. And then there's grad positions. These are basically advertised by universities who say, hey, man, come be a PhD student at Clemson, for example, or University of Oslo. They have PhD fellowships there. So please come be a PhD student here in our university. Here's one at Leiden University, Australian National University, University of Warwick. And then there's science engineering. Now, here is where I hung out. I hung out here in science engineering and in science and technical staff. These are the two places I hung out in. Let me make this, I'm just going to make the text a bit bigger. So right now in my stage of life, the Space Telescope Science Institute is hiring. I would click on this senior software engineer. I have until November 23rd, or I'm sorry, I have 48 days to apply for this job. Role and responsibilities: contribute to the software development of multiple projects and applications, provide mentorship and knowledge transfer to INS staff, proficiency in programming, Python, proficiency in Linux, familiarity with Mac OS because the Institute is nuts for Macs. And you need to have a bachelor's degree or a science discipline with a minimum of 8 years experience. Because this is senior, then you need to have a lot of experience. This is something I would consider applying for. A master's degree is preferred but not required. Okay. And again, like I said, master's degree, you're not going to find that very often. You're either going to find a bachelor's degree or a PhD. You're not going to generally find a master's degree out there. So that's a cool job. I would consider that. And then there's a gravitational fellow in gravitational wave physics, research associate in engineering, technical project manager. I don't generally like management positions, so I wouldn't apply for those. Here's an astronomer project scientist at ESO. This might be PhD level. Yeah, it does. It requires a PhD. But you could go to work at ESO if you had one. Science management, again, I stayed away from all this. I didn't want to be a program director or associate director of anything. These almost always require a PhD. But then science and technical staff. This is where you would want to hang out a lot if you only have a bachelor's degree. And like here's another one at Johns Hopkins. They're really going nuts, I think, because they've got a lot of programs coming up. They're working on Europa Clipper. They're working on, well, they just launched, or they're about to launch the DART mission. They were heavy into New Horizons when it launched. So they got a lot going on. And so here's somebody, well, they want somebody to have a PhD on this, scientific software developer. But sometimes I would require, I mean, if I felt like I could do the job, I'd apply for it anyway, even if it did have that requirement. It's hard to come back. It's hard for them to overcome it. If they say they want a PhD, then they really want a PhD. But sometimes you can get past it. Here's a good one: data science. Now, anything with scientist in the title is probably going to want a PhD, and here's one that does. So here's one: software developer for LSST. This is interesting. So I would be like, this is kind of cool. They want a software developer to create scientific software infrastructure for the International Dark Energy Science Collaboration, which aims to make high accuracy measurements of fundamental cosmological parameters. So I would be like, hey, okay, I'd apply for this. So this will be one I'd apply for. But you have to be willing to work in Stockholm. And then there's all the things they want you to be able to do. European positions tend to not be so caught up in education levels as much as American places. Application developer, here's a cool one: research technologist. That won't require a PhD. SK operations scientist, telescope hardware software programmer. This is at Sunspot, New Mexico. This would be a cool one if you wanted to work up in Apache Point. So here they want you to have a bachelor's degree in computer science or astronomy or related field, introductory background in controls. But then they have this preferred thing they'd like you to know. Again, none of it is beyond a bachelor's degree, so that's pretty cool. Look at this pay, man. This pay range is pretty cool. You can make up to $95,000 on this with this position. And this is at Apache Point Observatory. That's where they run. The Sloan Digital Sky Survey, and it's beautiful up there. It's in Sunspot, New Mexico. It's one of the places I would live happily, up there. That's where the old National Solar Observatory used to be. So this is just an example of what you would find in at the AAS Job Register. So start there. But now you think, well, wait a minute, is this all there is? The answer is no. What about think of any observatory, any one you want. You know, if you're in Europe, maybe you're thinking La Palma. Well, maybe not now. There's a volcano going off, but the Canary Islands has really good observatories there, and solar observatories and astronomical observatories. And you might want to just look up that on the web. Look up that website. South America, Chile has a lot. CTIO, which stands for Cerro Tololo Inter-American Observatory, operates Blanco and a bunch of others that were up there. You saw pictures of those. And then of course, Mauna Kea. Let's do that. Let's go to Mauna Kea. Let's see. Let me go Mauna Kea observatories. Okay, so Mauna Kea observatories, MaunaKeaobservatories.org. Here's all the observatories that are up there. And look here, right up here is a thing called careers, working at Mauna Kea observatories. Do you have a deep-rooted interest in exploring the universe and mysteries of nature? Then let's view the jobs. So you click on view jobs, and this page comes up. Let's view all jobs. Let's see what they've got here. And there's a lot of different jobs you can have. And some of these I can already tell won't require a PhD. So, like, here's one: scientific software engineer. This is what I did. So I would click on this, and I would say, "Oh, the day in the life of a software engineer." As a software engineer, scientific software engineer, you and your team would create reliable software systems that enable scientific discoveries year round. These systems include software that interfaces with the instrument at a low level, as well as tools that our observers use to execute their observations and the applications that provide all scientific data to our users and communities. I'd be applying for this. The requirements are Bachelor of Science degree in computer science, programming, or a science field, or relevant professional experience. So here's a job that if you can prove you can do it, you could probably get away without not having a bachelor's degree, right? So that's pretty cool. You need to know Python, C, and shell scripting. That's something you're going to have to get. If you don't, if you need, so let me I just want to emphasize this for a minute. Here's the skills you're going to need. You're going to have these skills. Linux, Unix, you have to know that operating system. If you're going to be a programmer, you need to know Python. You must know this. Go learn it. C is the best compiled language in the world, and it's still in use right now. Go learn it. And then learn Bash shell programming and C shell. I actually like the C shell the best, but some people like Bash. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go learn about it. This is all Unix stuff. Go get yourself a Linux laptop and learn this. Become able to become your own sysadmin on your own laptop, and those skills will get you through science like you wouldn't believe. So regardless of the degree you get, learn that. Unix, Linux, go learn it. Shell scripting, whether it's the T shell, C shell, or Bash, go learn it. Get Python under your belt. Just do it. It will serve you whether you go to work in crypto or banking or anywhere else. Go learn Python. And in science, it's used everywhere. And C, ANSI C. Forget C++. It sucks. Just use ANSI C. Okay. So those are the skills you need to have. If you can get a bachelor's degree, a lot of these jobs will open up real easy for you. So you're going to see this kind of stuff everywhere you go. You're going to see this. Experience in Unix, Linux, proficiency in these things. Experience in astronomy would be a plus. Experience with relational database systems. That's another skill. Learn MySQL or something that you can at least do basic queries of a database with. You don't have to be a DBA, but learn how to interact with a relational database system. That would serve you far. Okay. This would be at Keck. So you'd be operating, working at the Keck Observatory, one of the best in the world. So that's one. You could be a fiscal assistant. These are supervisory electrical engineers. These are things that would be more related to the building itself. Astronomical instrument technician. Let's take a look at this one. I don't know what that is, but you as a technician, you care for some of our observatory's most valuable assets, which makes the important science that takes place there possible. You maintain, repair, and make upgrades to our instruments. You also provide technical support for the astronomical instrumentation on the summit. These are all things that if you like working with gadgets and gear, this is a good field for you. Look at this, associate degree in electronics, engineering, and related fields. They want you to have 3 years experience in a highly technical environment. They want you not to use a vacuum dewars. Well, those are simple. They just hold liquid nitrogen. They want you to know about modern electronics technology. This is not a hard job to get access to astronomy in. And once you're in, who knows what you can do from there. And here's one that looks very accessible: night attendant. You maximize observing efficiency by maintaining a safe, productive conditions during night operations of the observatory. You regularly perform operational checks of key systems. You advise observing assistants of weather conditions. So basically, you're helping the observers. Okay. And you need to, here's what you need. You need to be able to have 5 years of work in a responsible position, mechanical and electrical expertise, basic hand tools, computer skills, valid driver's license. I mean, these are things most people can get if they don't have them. So that's a good entry level position there too. I don't see any observers, but that's generally also a position that only has sub PhD requirements. Some probably don't even need bachelor's degree. I could tell you the observers we had at Mauna Loa had been there for 20, 10, 15, 20 years. And only one of them, there were two, one of them had a bachelor's degree, the other one had no degree. And they were great. They were awesome. And they loved the job, right? It was a high paying job on the big island of Hawaii. And it was really highly sought after. It was low stress because the work day was predictable. You did the same thing every single day. And you had a very set schedule. You knew when you were going to be working and when you weren't. So it was it was a good job. I actually thought about doing it when one of the observers left. I thought, boy, if I could have talked my family into it to moving to Hilo, I might have taken that job because I really thought it would be a good one. All right. So that's where to look for jobs. I've told you a little bit about the nature of all the jobs. And oh my God, I'm out of time. So let me try to get to some of the chat here. Okay, let's see. All right, let me start at the end and scroll up. Better and Better one has a question. Let me get to that. What's the one in the Midwest that jointly owned by 3 universities? A former coworker of mine operates the observatory for them. The Midway, I don't know. I'm not sure. Yeah. Let's see. Looking at these jobs like observing night skies, they're a bit unreachable. I can find a job at a warehouse to finance studies, barley. That's all. And I hate wearing suit jobs too. Yeah. I mean, these are all great jobs. Fish head. Wouldn't getting a degree in astrology. No, they're going to find that out. A degree in astrology will give as a dead giveaway. Um, And here's a good comment. Yeah, this is from Charlie. If you get a postdoc position, your real job is to publish as much as possible. That's right. That's all you're doing is writing papers. And you're trying to establish your career. And then the purpose of a postdoc job is to put you in an environment where you're not dealing with administrative things, where you're not dealing with managerial things. You're just doing science all the time. That's it. Because your daily job as an astronomer, once you become a capital A astronomer, you end up with a lot of crap that isn't research. If you're at a university, you're also teaching. So there's a lot of demands on your time, and a postdoc position is designed to sequester you from all of that, to keep you focused on doing research so that you can write a lot of papers and get a name for yourself so that you will get hired by some tenure track university position. But it's still very competitive. And Better is commenting again. Whatever the field, math is important. I wish I'd put more effort in my school days. Yeah, it's important, but not it's not obstructive. It's not going to stop you from getting there. I struggle with math to this day, and I still manage to do quite well as a software engineer in science and astronomy. Let me read this comment from OIS Kungun. I could do a 3-year astronomy studies, but the issue is I have to go all math and physics from high school in order to get there because focus on humanitarian subjects like history. That's right. You may need to do, depending on what you've done in the past, if you're changing gears and paths, especially if you did not have a STEM education to begin with, then you are going to need to do some remedial stuff. You're going to have to, like when I started college when I was 30 years old, my second son was born. On his bris, I had to go to my very first class, which was college algebra. I had to, because I hadn't been in school for over 10 years since high school, and I did poorly in those high school math classes. I had to start from college. No, wait a minute. It was the class before college algebra. It was some kind of remedial thing to get me ready for college algebra. I had to take that, and it wasn't even algebra. It was pre-algebra math. And then I got to algebra, and then I went to trigonometry, and then calc 1, 2, and 3, and then what was after calc 3? I think it was differential equations, and that was about it. Linear algebra was the last math I took, and that was it. And yeah, it was hard. I'm not gonna lie to you, it was really hard. And in fact, I stressed about it a lot. There's a whole story about how I overcome my math blocks, and I made a video on it. It's in my channel, so you can do a search for it. Okay. Um, Let me read Galaxia's comment. In Europe, as far as I know, there's no astrophysics study. You either study astronomy or physics. Astronomy is the study of the universe, and physics is about physics on Earth. You could say, yeah, there is a delineation there, but it's not a strong one. You could tailor your physics education just by taking a few astronomy courses, right? Things that are like astrophysics, astrophysical processes. Like I took a 1 year course sequence, astrophysics 1 and 2, that was basically the physics involved of things like stars and galaxies, things like what they knew at the time of all of how stars shine, the life cycle of stars, galaxies, and things like that. And then it went uh, and then I had to take a cosmology class, 2 semesters of cosmology, which talked about the what we knew at the time of the large scale structure of the universe. And then I took a class on instrumentation from John Bally, which was about telescopes and cameras and um, uh, calibrating the data, things like that, to get me used to that. Then I took but I did this in addition to taking things like classical mechanics, quantum mechanics, E&M. Those are all classes that are more physics related. So these were all dovetailed in, and so you can kind of merge the two, because at some point you need to specialize. You can't just learn all of physics, which come on, let's face it, astrophysics is a part of it, right? Yeah, but so is plasma physics, and so is solid state physics. The things that govern LEDs and all of that. That's a different kind of physics. Plasma physics, what deals with the sun, the solar heliosphere, things like that. That's also a separate branch. So doing all of it in an undergraduate program is too much. So you have to kind of specialize at some point. And I think most universities that you do that, and maybe in Europe, you have to kind of do that too. Okay. Better and better. In my experience, few people in general are good at managing other people. Even the ones that seem to have gotten pretty far up are terrible at it. I know. The worst boss I ever had was at Dark Energy Survey. He was a nightmare. I couldn't get out of there fast enough away from him. Let's see. Charlie's commenting, after having been involved in a number of projects, few astronomers are good at managing people or projects. It's a problem. You know what else they're not good at? They're not good at writing code. They're not good at writing software that is maintainable and usable by other people. A big problem in astronomy right now is getting reproducible results from data that someone has written on their desktop, their laptop, whatever it is. They have this code. They have this code they wrote themselves, and they got some kind of answer out of that code, and they wrote a paper about that code. And then somebody else are using that code, and then someone else comes to read that paper, and they're like, "Oh, I'd like to try and replicate these results using this data and that code." They can't do it because the software is not maintainable. It only compiles on his laptop. You need only his environment to make it work. I can't tell you how many times I had to work on this at the Space Telescope Science Institute, where there were just astronomers who could not do their job if we upgraded Mac OS. I'm sorry, but that's not good. You got to be able to have good software best practices. And if you can write code that is maintainable using a repository of some time, whether it's Git or SVS or whatever, what did I think I used SVN. Subversion is what I used, and then Git came along later. I think that's what everybody's using now. If you can use a software repository, and if you can do versioning, and if you can write best practices, create unit tests, you are going to be a rock star in this field because it's badly, badly needed. Software of any kind now needs to be maintainable and follow best practices, not something written 1955 using an F77 compiler, and only compiles on Fortran. So you got to be able to write good code these days, and astronomers can't do that either, especially the old timers. The old timers are stuck in Fortran. They've grudgingly learned Python, but they're still stuck using Fortran with floating point compilers. Remember those? Oh my God. So anyway, yes, and this is a very good statement, Charlie. There is a good bit of need for engineers. If you can program something, if you can build something, if you can work with your hands, build a device, a computer, even if it's something as simple as making a Raspberry Pi take images off of your telescope that you've built yourself, some kind of simple hobby project, that knowledge that you gain doing that is going to be immensely valuable. And in fact, let me talk a little bit about amateur astronomers right now. The skills that you've gained being an amateur astronomer, especially if you're an imager, can be translated into the professional realm because you've got experience setting up equipment, calibrating data with your cameras, and processing that data later. Those skills that you've developed as an amateur astronomer imager will directly translate into a job in astronomy. You could say on a job application for some of these jobs that we've just looked at, the operators, and remember the one that just wanted good technical knowledge, that job is open to you just because you are an imager in your backyard. So the skills you're gaining as an amateur, you know what a Fitz image is. You know what a Fitz header is. You know how to make an HDU out of several Fitz images, right? How to make a data cube out of those. Those are things that are going to just serve you well and give you a leg up in the professional astronomy world. So I'll leave it at that. Unfortunately, I've got to go because it's getting late and I've gone over. I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to get on to my Discord server. Couple bits of news for those of you that hung around this long. Thursday is Thanksgiving here in the United States, so I won't be able to stream. And I'm going on a trip the following Monday. I'll be going to London for a little over a week, so I won't be able to stream at all next week. I'll be back on the 8th. So the week following the 8th, I'll be back streaming. What is that then? Let's see. That is, yeah, I'm coming back on the 8th, but I'm not going to be in any position to stream on the 9th. So I'll be back on the 14th. December 14th, just in time to get ready for JWST. We'll start our plans for JWST at that point. So just a little bit of news there. I had hoped I would get a chance, Peter, to go up to Newcastle, or South Shields at least, and it's just too far. I'm not going to be able to make it. I'll be unfortunately stuck in London. So the London, which London? There's only one, the one in the UK. I'm going to visit family. I'm taking my granddaughter and my wife and I are going to go visit because the pandemic has finally allowed us to go and visit family, and they haven't seen their great grandchild yet. So we're going up there for that for a week, and I'll be up there. So I'll be back on the 14th. We're going to start our focus on JWST pretty hard. So just to let you know. Okay, I hope this helps. I hope you guys got something out of this. Reach out to me anytime if you got a specific question about a specific job. I'm more than happy to offer any kind of advice on this. The world is your oyster right now. Never has there been an easier time to get a job in astronomy. The labor market is not only strong right now, but the need is getting greater. Astronomy is exploding in all kinds of ways, whether it's the Vera Rubin telescope coming online, JWST being launched, all these probes going out into space. If you can program, build, and operate these things, there's a place for you. So hone your skills. You don't necessarily need a bachelor's degree, but I would highly recommend getting one. And you don't even really need it in physics. You could get it in something else, computers maybe, technology, something like that would be enough. Okay. Thank you guys so much for watching. And as always, keep looking up.